brought to you by New York City Atheists Incorporated. I'm your host, Dennis Horvitz, the David Letterman of the Hopelessly Damned. Dinosaurs ruled the Earth for almost 150 million years. In any case, dinosaurs apparently once trod upon what is now the Jersey Turnpike. And I just pity the poor bastards who were working the toll booths then. But you didn't, well, okay, never mind. In any case, our guest is Dr. J. Brent Bennington, who is Associate Professor of Geology at Hofstra University. And he's going to speak to us today about dinosaurs, which is very special for me because it means that, for once, I won't be the only dinosaur in the program. But it's all right. This is volunteer, folks. And the topic is when dinosaurs ruled New York. And apparently, if most people don't think of New York or even the mid-Atlantic or Eastern Atlantic or New England area as having been a place where dinosaurs would have been, I guess because we associate them generally with tropical climates. And but 65 million years ago, just before the dinosaurs disappeared, the climate situation was a tad different. In any case, I'm not the one to be explaining all of this, and I would like to introduce our guest, Dr. J. Brent Bennington, please.
However, there were two things, excuse me, that happened during the Mesozoic in the East that did make dinosaur fossils. The first thing was the separation of Africa from North America, which we call the rifting of the supercontinent of Pangaea, which I'll illustrate in a second. And the second thing was just the development of a big, broad Atlantic coastal plain, a big shoreline environment along the eastern edge of the continent. So we have dinosaur age rock around New York City because there were a couple of, they weren't big mountain building events, but they were events that produced some sedimentary rock. Stretching from Virginia all the way up through Pennsylvania and up across northern New Jersey. And just poking up into New York here, we have a region of sedimentary rock that dates from the late Triassic when dinosaurs first evolved. And then there's a little region in here which continues on into the beginning of the Jurassic period. And then that's, so we have some rocks from the beginning of the age of dinosaurs. And then we have a belt of layers of, it's not really rock, it's just compressed sand and mud that was deposited offshore under the young Atlantic Ocean that dates from the very end of the age of dinosaurs, from the Cretaceous. The Haddonfield Hadrosaurus comes from these layers towards the end of the age of dinosaurs. And I want to just show you, some of the examples of these things and kind of flesh it out for you a little bit. How am I doing for time, by the way? Good? All right, so let's start with the Triassic, the late Triassic. Well, what's going on in the world in the late Triassic? All of the continents are clumped together into this supercontinent that geologists call Pangaea. So we don't have a collision going on to make a mountain range, to make dinosaur fossils, but we have the next best thing, which is a separation. So we open up the Atlantic Ocean, and as Africa pulls away from North America and the Atlantic Ocean begins to form in between the pieces, that stretching event creates these enormous valleys up and down the margin of the continent. Stretching continental crust is sort of like taking a pan of brownies and pulling on each end. As you pull this stuff apart, big fractures open up and blocks of the crust sink along those faults and create depressions. This is happening now in East Africa. East Africa is in the process of being pulled away from the rest of Africa, and these enormous rift valleys have formed, and they have the big lakes in them like Lake Victoria. Right, so they're big depressions that form in the crust of the Earth. Rock on the part of the blocks that sticks up erodes, and rivers carry it in to the depression, and the depression fills in. And the more the crust stretches, the more the blocks sink. As they sink, they get filled in with layers. They sink some more and more layers. So you can actually end up forming miles and miles and miles of continuous sedimentary rock layers this way. So it's another good way to make the rocks that you need to preserve the fossils. And there's a sort of a cartoon version of it. The crust is being stretched, block of the crust is sinking, erosion is transporting sediment into the rift valley, and you make sedimentary rock. And these rift valleys exist all up and down the margin of North America. Some of them are offshore. Some of them are buried under younger layers of sediment. But a number of them are exposed at the surface, and we can poke around in them and find fossils. So we're going to focus on New Jersey, northern New Jersey, part of the Newark Basin. And just to orient you, this is a geologic map. The different colors refer to different rock formations. Geologists like very colorful maps. We like sort of Dayglow psychedelic maps. There's the New York border. There's New York City. And we're going to look at a slice. We'll imagine taking a knife and cutting into the surface and exposing it so we can look and see what the rock layers look like along that dotted line, going from essentially New York, or not the dotted line, I'm sorry, going from New York City across to just a few miles west of Paterson, New Jersey. So there we go. There's where we are right now. We're actually in that building right there. We're sitting on this ancient metamorphic bedrock. As soon as you cross the Hudson River, you've crossed into the Triassic. Next time you drive over the George Washington Bridge, when you get down on the other side, turn to the person next to you and say, "We are now in the Triassic." See what that gets you. The Palisades cliffs along the Hudson River are a big layer of volcanic rock, well actually a layer of igneous rock of magma that was injected into the layers of sediments. As the crust is stretched apart, magma from the Earth's mantle is able to work its way up through the crust and erupt within the layers or erupt out onto the surface of the layers as lava flows. So you drive across the Palisades, you head west on Route 80. When you get to Paterson, New Jersey, you see another big ridge, and that's a lava flow. You drive a few more miles, there's another ridge, another lava flow. There are 3 big lava flows that were erupted out onto the surface during the early part of the Mesozoic. And it just so happens that when you get to Paterson, that first lava flow, we can date that lava flow. It's 208 million years old, plus or minus half a million years, or 206, I'm sorry, 206. And that's the beginning of the Jurassic. So we know all of the rock layers that come on top of that lava flow are Jurassic. The ones below are Triassic. There we go. So the Palisades, beautiful, beautiful cliffs that have this very vertical look to them because of the kind of rock that they're made out of. They look like a palisade fence because they're made of this fine-grained igneous rock. Paterson. You go to the Great Falls at Paterson. The Great Falls are falling over a 70-foot thick lava flow that was erupted out onto the surface during the very beginning of the Jurassic. If you hunt around and find the bottom of the lava flow, below the bottom of the lava flow you have layers of sedimentary rock. If you go find some place where they're putting in a housing development and they're peeling up those layers, digging them up, you will find fossils. And I thought I got rid of this slide. This is more geology than I need to subject you guys to. Some of the layers in New Jersey were formed at the bottom of a lake, and if you dig around through those layers, you find fossil fish and fossil reptiles like phytosaurs. The bones and teeth of phytosaurs have been found throughout this region of New Jersey in these lake deposits. When they were building the foundation of the George Washington Bridge, they dug up a phytosaur on the New Jersey side. Phytosaurs look like crocodiles, but they have their nostrils in the wrong place. Crocodiles have nostrils at the end of their snout. Phytosaurs had their nostrils on top of their head, but similar kind of animal ecologically. Lots and lots of rock layers. Very few dinosaur bones. The environments that existed in these rift valleys were just not good for preserving bone. The rivers weren't big enough probably to create the kinds of sandbars and things that would entomb dinosaur carcasses. These are actually the only dinosaur bones that are known from the rift basin that runs up from Connecticut up into Massachusetts. And I don't know that any dinosaur bones have ever been found in the New Jersey basin. But lots of dinosaur footprints. A wonderful record. Thousands and thousands of dinosaur footprints from these rocks. The environments that existed in this rift basin were very good for preserving footprints. Triassic footprints look different than Jurassic footprints. We get a sense from the footprints that dinosaurs got a lot bigger in the Jurassic across the boundary in time. And animals like the phytosaur, there were lots of big, scary reptiles in the Triassic besides dinosaurs. Most of them go extinct at the end of the Triassic, and dinosaurs are sort of left to take over the world. And the footprints seem to indicate that that's what they did. They got bigger and more diverse crossing the Triassic Jurassic. An hour and pull off and go see Dinosaur State Park. It's spectacular. All right, so we have wonderful record of dinosaur trackways and some fossils of the other kinds of animals that lived with dinosaurs from the Triassic. What about the end of the age of dinosaurs, the late Cretaceous? Well, at this time, the late Cretaceous, global sea level was probably as high as it ever gets. There was almost no ice in the world. All of the glaciers had melted. It was global warming gone to its logical extreme. All of that water was in the oceans. At the same time, these continents were moving away from each other at a very rapid rate, and lots of the ocean floor was relatively young and warm and was sort of floating up on the mantle underneath, displacing the water upward. So the coastline in the late Cretaceous would have been well to the west of New York City, Richmond, would have been lapping right up against the whatever existed of the Appalachian Mountains back then. So New Jersey, most of New Jersey was underwater, off on the shelf. And again, if we sort of imagine taking a slice from Philadelphia down to Atlantic City and looking at what those layers look like from the side, we see that there's a nice layer cake going from the Cretaceous, the end of the age of dinosaurs, up through the age of mammals to the modern beach deposits at Atlantic City. The whole package is tilted towards the mid-ocean ridge because as the ocean floor out here cools over time, it sinks and it sort of pulls the edge of the continent down with it. And as those layers get pulled downward, the older layers poke up to the west. So we have this wonderful belt of exposure where we can go dig around in these layers of Cretaceous sedimentary rock and look for fossils. I take students to do this all the time. You find wonderful fossils of shells, weird coiled oysters and brachiopods and ancient squid. Very easy to find fossils like this. If you dig around enough, you can find shark teeth or fish teeth, or if you're having a really good day, you can find maybe a tooth from a mosasaur, which was a giant swimming monitor lizard that lived in the oceans back at the end of the age of dinosaurs. This is my favorite reconstruction of a mosasaur. This is the last thing you would see snorkeling in the late Cretaceous. Notice the teeth point backwards. That's to prevent you from leaving the mouth once you're in the mouth. Now, in these, we don't find a lot of dinosaur fossils in these rocks because dinosaurs didn't live in the ocean. Mosasaurs did, but all dinosaurs, all animals that were truly dinosaurs were terrestrial. So to find dinosaur fossils in these layers, you would have had to have had a dead dinosaur get washed out to sea, after a flood, and its bloated carcass kind of floating out, and then finally, the sharks eat enough of it that it sinks to the bottom. It did happen, but it happened rather rarely. So we have very spotty dinosaur fossils, but we do have the bits and pieces of this Tyrannosaurus relative called Dryptosaurus, named by Joseph Leidy, actually. And if you kind of put together all of the bits and pieces of dinosaurs that have been found in New Jersey in these layers that are exposed from the end of the Cretaceous, you've got Dryptosaurus, this tyrannosaur thing. We've got a few bits and pieces of ostrich-like dinosaurs, some bits and pieces of armored dinosaurs, and we just because we got lucky, we happened to find a nearly complete Hadrosaurus that floated out and sank to the bottom. All right, so we at least get a picture of what was living on the East Coast at the end of the age of dinosaurs. Pretty much what was on the West Coast, except for nobody's found any horned dinosaurs yet, which are extremely abundant in the western part of the country. And it's kind of interesting. Why shouldn't they be here in the East? Maybe we haven't found them yet. Maybe they really weren't here. We don't know. All right, so that's actually a good place to stop. How am I?
Keep going.
I keep going? Okay. All right, so part 3 is short. I call part 3 Revenge of the Nerds. And there are the nerds. A team of scientists who back in the 1980s developed a bunch of evidence to suggest that coincident with the extinction of the dinosaurs, the Earth got whacked by a giant asteroid. And this is a group that includes a physicist, a geologist, and the really sketchy-looking people are paleontologists. So I'll show you briefly what their evidence is, but basically they develop a pretty convincing body of evidence that a large object came smashing into the Earth 65.5 million years ago. And they argue that the result of that impact was a global environmental catastrophe that wipes out the dinosaurs. Lots of different sea creatures, all of the marine reptiles in the ocean, all of the coiled shelled squid that were living in the ocean, lots of different kinds of plankton. A total sort of global collapse of the marine and terrestrial food chain that leaves the dinosaurs gone and lets the mammals finally get a shot at taking over the world. Mammals evolve at the same time dinosaurs do, but don't ever become a big deal ecologically until the dinosaurs are eliminated. So that asteroid, that was the best thing that ever happened to us as far as we're concerned. Because if that hadn't happened, we would be dinosaurs. We'd be a bunch of reptiles. Some of the initial evidence for the impact was in a layer of clay that was sitting right on top of the last layer that had Mesozoic fossils, below the first layer that had tertiary fossils. In Italy, these guys found an unusual amount of a very rare element called iridium. Iridium is very scarce in the crust of the Earth, but it's very common in meteorites. And then they went around the world, and everywhere they looked, where they had a clay layer at the very, very end of the last layer with Mesozoic fossils, they found that enrichment of iridium, and they concluded that this iridium must have come from a large extraterrestrial object that smashed into the Earth and was vaporized and settled out around the globe. And then people started looking for other evidence of an impact, and they were finding things like little beads of mineral that were originally glass. This is the molten rock that's falling out of the sky from after the impact vaporizes and melts a ungodly quantity of the Earth's crust. It took a decade or so to find the crater, because if you have a big impact, you ought to have a crater, and turns out there's a humongous crater, multi-ringed impact basin, buried underneath the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula down in the Gulf of Mexico. So they have their evidence for an impact. They have this big crater, and again, they infer that this wiped out the dinosaurs. Can they prove that this wiped out the dinosaurs? No. It's very difficult to, you can prove that the impact happened. Proving it actually caused a particular event, like a mass extinction, is another story. But the point of my Act 3 here is that this is not a settled issue. If you turn on the Discovery Channel tells you dinosaurs were wiped out by an asteroid impact. We don't know that for certain. And that is still being actively researched. And one of the best places to look for evidence of what happened at the end of the age of dinosaurs is New Jersey. Because in New Jersey, we happen to have a pretty complete sequence of layers that crosses the boundary that marks the end of the Mesozoic. And if you drill down through the New Jersey coastal plain and you pull up the layers that were deposited on the ocean floor at the end of the Mesozoic, you find a layer right at the very end, sitting on top of the last layer that has Cretaceous fossils in it. You find a centimeter-thick layer that's chock full of little mineral beads. Those are the tektites. That's the fallout from the impact. So I don't doubt there was an impact, and I don't doubt that it was a bad day because it was raining molten glass in central New Jersey. Not good. This is a paper that was written by some people at Rutgers University. And there's the layer that's got all the little beads of molten glass. These are layers of mud that are full of the kinds of microfossils that you associate with the Cretaceous period, Cretaceous. And then there's the layer of beads, and then this mud is full of microfossils that you associate with the Tertiary. So it really looks like that impact is happening right at the end of the age of dinosaurs. But they point out in the paper, just to be honest, that there are some blobs of clay sitting up above that layer that have the same kinds of fossils you have down here. And they don't really know how to explain that. And one explanation, it's not the only explanation, but one explanation is that the impact didn't actually cause the end of the world, that the animals and plants that inhabited the ocean in the Cretaceous persisted for some period of time after that impact before they went extinct. So again, this is not a settled issue. People are still working on this, and we're getting some really interesting information about this from New Jersey. I have a student right now who's working on some samples from the American Museum of Natural History. The curator of vertebrate paleontology, or one of them, Neil Landman at the American Museum of Natural History, has found a layer of fossils at a new excavation. They were putting in a new bridge, and they exposed some layers, and he found a bunch of fossils typical of the Cretaceous sitting above an interval where he was able to demonstrate the iridium spike, the concentration of extraterrestrial iridium. So there's the end of the world right there. That's where the asteroid hits. But for some period of time after that, life is good. You've got all the things living on the seafloor that we associate with the time period before the asteroid impact. So what's going on here? Is this 2 months? Are these guys just hanging on and they finally gave up the ghost? Or is this 2,000 years? Or 10,000 years? We don't know. That's what we're working on. That's what one of my students are analyzing some samples to try and figure out how long would it have taken to deposit that interval of sediment with fossils. Was it a rapid event, or was it a very slow event that indicates that life went on as usual after that asteroid impact and something else wiped out the dinosaurs? And one of the things that makes me question this is that I've been studying an interval down here way before the end of the Cretaceous, near the beginning of the end of the Cretaceous, and I see the same sequence of stuff that Dr. Landman is digging up here at the very end of the Cretaceous. So this doesn't look weird to me. It looks exactly like what I see down here. It looks like business as usual, in a sense. And then one last, and here's this is one of my former students digging up some ammonite fossils in the layers, the lower layers that I studied. And then one very, very last comment that also sort of points to the relevance of this area to the study of dinosaurs. I mentioned before, in the late Triassic, we have the first dinosaurs, and we have all these other creatures sharing the world with the dinosaurs. And then at the end of the Triassic, for reasons that are not terribly well understood, most of these things go extinct. Dinosaurs don't. So there's a mass extinction at the end of the Triassic, and the dinosaurs owe their reign on Earth to that mass extinction, which wiped out all their competitors. And then they get wiped out by a mass extinction, and we take over the world at the end of the Cretaceous. One of the best records of the transition from the Triassic to the Jurassic is in the rocks that we have in New Jersey and up there in central Connecticut and Massachusetts. So again, some of the information, the paleontology and the geology that's going to answer these questions of what happened at these critical intervals in the history of dinosaurs, those questions are going to be answered using the rocks and the data from our part of the world, not necessarily from out west or China or South America, but from New Jersey and Connecticut. Yay us. And we don't need to talk about that. There we go. Thank you.
This is a question that actually is very pertinent to atheists, because sooner or later we get asked questions like this or something like this. Do you have an abbreviated answer to the claim that dinosaurs and human beings coexisted?
There isn't a single iota of evidence that human beings and dinosaurs ever came even close to coexisting.
Fortunately for the dinosaurs, they'd have been wiped out a lot sooner, I'm sure.
We would have eaten them. They probably tasted
Yes.
like chicken.
You know, that's a very interesting point because, you know, the claim for the Loch Ness Monster is, you know, is this, and I'm thinking if that, such a creature ever existed, the people living in that area would have killed them and eaten them anyway.
It's what we do.
That's what we do best.
We move into an area and we eat everything.
Yeah,
We did it in Hawaii. Hawaii, before humans arrived in Hawaii, the largest animals in the Hawaiian Islands were these enormous flightless geese. And there were no predators in the Hawaiian Islands because they're too far out in the ocean, and mammals were never able to get out to the islands. So the islands were populated by reptiles and birds, very much like the Galapagos. Well, I saw a very interesting talk once by an archaeologist who worked on a dig in Hawaii, and he said, basically in the dig in this cave, you find goose bones, goose bones, goose bones, goose bones, the first shred of charcoal, and then the goose bones are gone. And he figures it took the Polynesians about 1 generation to eat all the geese. And you got to imagine, these guys cross the ocean in a canoe and they come up on shore, and what's waiting for them? Big fat geese that are like, hey, how you doing? Welcome to Hawaii.
You just basically walk up to and club them.
What's for dinner? Goose. Yeah. So, yeah, no, I mean, it's ridiculous. And even the creationists affiliated with, like, the Discovery Institute, for example, even those guys have been forced to acknowledge that all of the human footprints that have been found associated with dinosaur footprints are frauds. They're fakes.
Or just mischaracterized.
Yeah, I mean.